Hello and welcome to our Surviving Work conversation about solidarity and organising at work. And to have this conversation with me, we have Gerry Looker. Say Looker or Luca?
Depends where you come from.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm
I
saying
say
Looker.
But if you're in the south, you say Looker.
Okay, Gerry Looker. He was a regional organiser, one of the best organisers in Unison. And he works a lot with health and social care workers. So I'm going to ask the first question to introduce yourself, which is, I want you to tell me something about your experience of working in unions and what brought you into it, what made you an organiser?
Okay, well, I think there was a sort of gradual process of me becoming a trade union activist. I left school 15, started working in Liverpool City Council, joined Aldo probably on the first day or two, because that's what you did. During my time with what was then MSF, I was attracted into working in the NHS, and I enjoyed working in the NHS and supporting NHS workers. I was, very positive about the idea of public provision of health services, and I, associated with what people were doing, and wanted to support people. And one of the things I found in the NHS was there was a terrific demand for union support around individual representations in particular, whether within internal proceedings or through professional bodies, due partly to the culture of the NHS, which in many areas has been quite a discipline type culture, bullying culture, but also public sector workers who deal with the public are very vulnerable to false complaints as well, and I enjoyed the helping people. Yeah. So eventually, for a number of reasons, I left MSF, which I don't need to go into here, and went to work for Unison. One of the frustrations with MSF was Unison was the bigger public sector union, and whenever we had joint meetings, their officials would always be fronting things up, So going to work for Unison, I had that role then of being a key official in negotiations and things like that with employers, and that's what I wanted to do, and I've been doing that for 14 years now with Unison. So 25 years in all as a full-time official.
Well, we know each other, but I'll just tell you a little bit about what brought me into working in unions. And I come from a sort of professional background, so my first job was a really weird job, was actually as a philosopher, if you can believe it. Those are the days when that was a job. Yeah. And I was working as a research assistant at London University at Birkbeck, which at the time was supposed to be a sort of left-wing adult education university, and was being completely brutalised. And one of the things, my first union was Unison actually, because I counted as sort of technical staff. And the big issue then was about sexual harassment actually of women staff and women students. Very male-dominated profession at that time, and philosophy was almost all men. So I sort of went into it with this sort of really kind of profound sense of justice and something really unfair going on. And then I got involved in through trade union education, which has been my working life really. Eventually ended up working for the Miners International, so I was head of education for about 10 years there. And I love education. I was always much more interested in how do you get people who can't say something to defend themselves. So I've always had this sort of really kind of probably self-righteous sort of sense of justice. I've had that since I was very young. I'm also a twin, so I've got this incredible sense of what is fair. If something is slightly out, it really makes me go quite nuts. So I've always had this very sort of strong sense of, is it fair or not?
Yeah.
Emotionally, that's driven me. But also I think later on doing this kind of work around mental health, I was always sort of very frustrated with working in trade unions, because I felt that the emotional side of working life and also being in the union was never really addressed. So a lot of people who are very vulnerable in the working system really got overlooked. So I suppose what's kept me working in some way in employment relations and in unions is the sense that it's all very well saying we've got to collectivise and stand together, but actually the real issue is how do we do this, given that a lot of people are really very frightened at work. Yeah. So that's where I'm coming from. Now, we've just, a couple of weeks ago, we had the second reading and the passing of the Trades Union Bill. Doesn't sound very exciting, and it was, I don't know about you, but I found it really weird that it was slipped in on a Monday in conference season. That almost, I mean, even people who I know are quite active in unions kind of missed it somehow. They sort of lost a lot of momentum, and part of that maybe is because of Corbyn getting in Labour. But we've got this bill, which is a real problem. And on the face of it, it sounds really kind of bureaucratic and administrative, doesn't it? So we've got a more sort of rigorous demands in terms of voting for strike action. So it's a curtailing of the capacity to take strike action. And also the issue of the public sector check-off system, which is how trades unions collect money from members. That doesn't sound too disastrous, but it's quite a problem, isn't it? So I want you to unpack that a bit for us.
Well, I think the Trade Union Bill is an extension of anti-union legislation which has been introduced since 1980 and breaches international labour organisation standards, probably in breach of decisions of the Court of Human Rights. And one thing I found interesting about it is on the issue of picketing, there's going to be a requirement for pickets to wear armbands identifying who they are and giving the names to the police. And one of our representatives in the East Midlands, who's Jewish, said, "There's no way I'm wearing an armband," And I think this is ill thought through, and there is a lot of repercussions going to happen around not just trade union rights, but civil rights. I think if we look at the impact specifically on trade unions, however, the check-off is a system which for years has been the way in which trade unions collect subscriptions from members in public services and in the private sector too. It's common. So ending that will cause major problems for trade unions in terms of financial income, looking at areas such as civil service where it's already happened and it's just going on in probation service at the minute. Right. What we see is that union membership reduces by about 15-20%, although that's coming up, but it creates a major administrative burden for unions. My view, personally, is that trade unions as independent bodies, although they exist because there's employers, should really focus on being independent of the employer in terms of the collection of union subs. And I think it would actually, in the longer term, if it goes ahead, will help to create a different type of union at the workplace, which is more focused on the workplace as opposed on perhaps national issues, which particularly in the public sector has happened. So on that point, check-off is a threat in the immediate removal, but I think over time it could be a positive. And I don't think that's what the Conservative government wants. No. On the issue of strikes, they're putting in a threshold for strike ballots, which will mean that if you look at most strike ballots in local government and health over the last 5 or 10 years, and there haven't been that many. It's not very. I mean, we are living in a time where it's the lowest ever level of industrial action in the country. It would mean there would be no chance of any industrial action taking place. And, industrial action is something which I think is a really big thing to ask workers to do, to withdraw the labour. It's something which shouldn't be done without proper consideration. And we have asked people to take action on ballot turnouts, which have been very low. The reason they're low is because of the method of the ballot, and the view of many of us in the trade unions is that we haven't got a problem with postal ballots. That's where we're at. But why can't we have a ballot, say, online, as is happening for in other areas of democracy in this country? Or, you know, a ballot which is workplace-based, if individual and secret. There are other ways of doing ballots which would be able to, you'd get to these thresholds and you'd have a proper result and outcome. At the minute, it's difficult for trade union leaderships because you have a ballot and maybe 20% of the people record a vote, and the majority of that group are in favour, but that's a minority. But is that reflective of the 100% given the problems around postal balloting? You don't know.
I hadn't realised that, despite being an expert in the area, that it is restricted by law to a postal ballot. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So, most people get junk mail.
Yes,
and
that's
bin
right.
it. And, the last local government strike on pay, there were people who were in favour of it, who were on strike, but they hadn't voted because they didn't realise it was a ballot paper which had come through a letterbox and not some junk.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Devil's in the details in these things, isn't it? But that's interesting what you say. I mean, I agree with you about the sort of changing culture. And one of the big debates been running for a long time in trades unions is about an organising model of trades unions, and often that's put in direct opposition to a servicing model.
Yes.
Blah, blah. It's a false dilemma, all unions do both things. But I want to ask you about your experience of organising, because you're a great organiser. You really deliver in terms of organising, but often that's misunderstood as just recruiting people, getting people into the union. So I want you to describe how you approach organising people in health and social care.
Okay. Well, organising and servicing, I think that was a debate which has really scarred trade unions over the last 20 years in terms of the way we've operated, without going into the detail. It's as you say, it's a false dichotomy. The way I think good organisation comes from is by looking at why do people join the trade union. They join the trade union overwhelmingly to get support at work. So good support comes from good structure and good individual representation. So it's important to create a feeling in the workplace that there's a union. So from that point of view, you need a representative. Representatives are pivotal to good organisation, in my view, and good representative, not just anybody, somebody who has a respect of their peers and colleagues. But that then, what flows from that is the importance of that the representative communicates. There needs to be communication with the employer about how the workers are feeling about things, what their views are, and to the workers from the representative about what the management are thinking and what their plans are and why they're doing stuff. And good communication avoids disputes, and representatives are key to that. Within the workplace, I can remember the union I was in where nearly everybody went to the union meetings. It was all about our terms and conditions of employment, and what was going on, and if anybody was being disciplined, it was seen as outrageous, and things of that nature, that solidarity, I think has been lost to a great degree over the last 20 years for a number of reasons. We're not good at telling people what we do.
Yeah.
The only time trade unions are in the papers, in the media, is when there's a strike. But every day of the week, my diary's fairly busy, and what I'm doing is either representing people or advising people in representing people, or doing some initiative around building the organisation or doing some training or things of that nature. And training is important. And if people are thinking about, well, could I be a union rep? What's in it for me? My experience is being a good trade union representative develops an individual to a massive level. The situations you get yourself into and who you're dealing with, and you can deal with people at all different levels, and it's a really positive thing to do, I think. But I would say that, wouldn't I?
Well, it helps if you enjoy it,
Yes,
and it helps if you like people. I
Yeah.
think that's one of the things that's sort of quite, when we talk about it rather than do it, often gets missed, is the genuine joy that you get of knowing that you can make a little bit of difference, and the way that really humanises you, because it's often easy to feel completely defeated by your work environment, and just small things make a big difference psychologically and politically, actually, I think.
Yeah.
What kind of issues and themes do you think are particularly important to health and social care workers? Because I came to visit you in a hospital, didn't I?
That's right.
Which
Yeah,
was
that
the
was
hospital? I can't
at Northampton General Hospital.
Right.
Yeah. I covered that hospital for a number of years. Yeah.
You're very fond of that place. Oh, shame.
Yeah, I don't do now, but I did do for years. Yeah. I was. Yes, I think I was fairly well known there.
And it was well organised.
I remember a new chief executive, because they've had a lot. A new chief executive asked to see me with the Unison branch secretary and branch chair, and he said to me, "You have a ferocious reputation." You see.
Great.
So my colleagues sat there and sort of smiled a bit and were looking for my reaction, and I just said, "Well, that's good, because you've got a group of directors and senior managers who are bullies, and the whole culture is bullying, and that's all I deal with here. And if you stop that, then perhaps my reputation will soften. And if you go down the road to, I mentioned another couple of trusts and speak to their sort of heads, senior HR people, they would say I was all right, So the thing, as a trade union official, I think you've got to adapt to the situation you find yourself in. And
I think that's also sort of quite a hard thing to take on the chin, that often, particularly in times of conflict, you're asked to adopt a very aggressive position. And yet when it comes to other issues, suddenly it's like you're expected to come from a Swiss girls finishing school, you know what I mean? So you do have to be able to box quite fast about different positions.
Well, I think the full union official's position is a very interesting one, because you can get a group of members who are angry about bullying, for example, and you've got to, if they want to do something, you've got to instill in them the confidence to do it. And in many cases, you have to adopt a lead role. Yeah. So you're almost an agitator. Yeah. But then there comes a position where your position as an official switches, because you're looking for resolution.
That's right.
And so it's almost going from like an agitator to a mediator of an issue.
Yeah. Do you know, it's so interesting. This is going a bit off tangent, but I think it's quite important. I used to do quite a lot of mental health work with trade union leaders at Ruskin College, because trade union leadership still comes through there. And we had some very fruity debates about the politics of mental health, what have you. But actually the thing that really stuck, which I think is quite similar to psychotherapists and health workers, is it's this, you are forced into a position where you have to express the emotions of people that can't express their emotions at work. And anger is the big one, because frankly no one wants to lose their job. But of course there's a lot of anger around conflict. So trades unionists particularly are put in a position where they're there to be angry when their membership can't be angry. The trouble is, both on a personal level and then on a negotiating level, is how do you calm yourself down enough not to be to be able to negotiate, but also not to be a complete nightmare in your personal life. You can't be that angry all the time.
Well, I think somebody once said about anger is you don't lose your temper, you find it. And But one thing I always do is I always say to people who are really, brassed off with a bullying manager or director, what would you like to say to them? What would you like me to say to them, which you can't say? And that is it's quite powerful for individuals, that somebody will go in and say what needs to be said, and that happens on occasion.
You see, you nearly bring me to tears there, because I hope to convince you of this by the end of this interview, that for me the work of a mental health worker, psychoanalyst, and a trade unionist is not so different, because the job of the therapist is to help the patient articulate the things that they cannot say to themselves or to other people. So you're taking a position on something that's wrong at times when people are actually vulnerable. They can't say it. I mean, intellectually they may know it, but emotionally it may be impossible for them to say it.
Yes.
So that's also part of the privilege, isn't it, of working with people as a unionist?
Well, one of the closest people I worked with in Unison has been the branch secretary, and he was a community mental health nurse.
Really?
And we used to talk about the parallels in the job, and he'd have his Unison head on as a union representative one day, and then he'd be working as a mental health nurse the next. But I'd sit there and watch him, and I'd say to him, you're dealing with this like a mental health nurse. There now needs to be a little bit of direction in trying as a trade union representative.
Well, now we have come to the politics of psychoanalysis, which is, so one of the criticisms of Freud is that it's not enough to understand it, you've got to do something about it. So that's the Marxist coming out, which is it's about praxis, isn't it? It's about knowing it, and it's also about knowing the world and changing the world. And there's a big debate in mental health, I think in health, about where the emphasis now needs to lie. What we know is that working in health and social care is a very political thing now. It's almost, it doesn't matter what your ideology is, you're actually dealing with very political phenomenon, which is the winding down of welfare. Inequality, poverty of wages. One of the things that's come up in these conversations has been 30% of health workers are also on welfare benefits because they're not earning enough. I mean, this is an extraordinary state of affairs, isn't it?
And it's also one of the issues at Addenbrooke's in Cambridge, isn't it, around staffing levels. It's because it's a fairly expensive part of the country. And the restriction on public sector pay since 2010. People are not going to go and live in areas where it's expensive. It's a time bomb, I think, and I personally, it's on my personal view, but I think this government is about continuing the dismantling of public services and discrediting public services as a provision, and so that we shift to a different type of system, and will people wake up to that? Do people of a generation have the same attachment as my parents do to the National Health Service? It was common for young kids to die young in the 30s. I think the recent political developments at least have given a glimmer of hope that perhaps these sort of discussions are going to be more prevalent, and that we get some honesty around the political direction of provision of public service.
The other thing that you mentioned, which I think is really important, is the word debate. Because I think that's one of the things that gets lost in our collective memory. The further we get away from a public NHS, unionisation, is the experience of being with a group of people where you can say what you think without somebody beating you up or shooting the messenger, which at best, not always, but at best, that's what unions used to offer, a space where people were protected and could say what was actually happening at work. Now, there's a hope, isn't there, that with this sort of revival of grassroots debates and political debates, that whatever you think about Corbyn, people feel that it's important that they should start to talk about the political issues and the future of the welfare state. But the problem is for sort of people working in health and social care is that many of them are precarious workers. They're actually frightened. They're also often part-time and they don't have time to go to union meetings. So presumably a big part of an organiser's job is to go to people rather than get them to come to union meetings.
Yeah, well, I think it's trade union point of view. I was in a meeting the other week at a council, and they came up with proposals for changing certain payments for out of hours on social work, and the representatives say, right, how are we going to respond? And I used to say, well, we go and talk to the people who it's going to affect. That's the basic default position. And if trade union representatives and officials don't talk to the workers who are in the union, then they're not doing a job. Because the policy should develop from the people at the workplace.
So in trade union education, we're very strict about this, that you never start any event, activity, meeting telling people what the issues are. You have the respect to say, what are the issues?
Exactly.
And listen to the answer. And it's from that we find the collective solutions to that. So the attempt is to build solidarity, firstly, by showing the respect of saying, what do you think? What's actually happening for you?
And if you look at that example in terms of trying to organise in non-union areas, I've seen, and I've been guilty of it myself on one occasion, trying to generate a campaign which was about join the union. However, what it should have been about was the issues which required there to be a union.
Thank you for spelling that out for us.
So, for example, I was in a workplace where we got access to members because to the workers because of the fact that this private contractor was looking at getting other contracts and didn't want argy-bargy with the trade union over that, and they allowed us access to a workplace, and we went in and listened to the workers and, what's it like to work here? You'd tell us what it's like to work here. And some of the things they didn't think they had any issues about were issues such as the level of disciplinaries. They thought it was normal to face a disciplinary meeting every other week. And, I'm exaggerating slightly, but it was pretty bad. And when we come and say, well, hang on a minute, that's not a disciplinary issue, and let's have a look at your policies. And when we started people were joining, we represented them, and we got more people joining, and we got enough to get a recognition deal. So it's important that the issues in work, what it's like to work there, then connect to how a trade union can improve and change the conditions in work.
When I'm working with trade union activists, we do this activity at the beginning of every workshop of a listening swap, which is in pairs, asking people to just listen to another person without any interruption, without asking questions for 5 minutes, and then swap round. And it sounds really dumb, again, all this stuff is really obvious, but as soon as we stop doing that bit, then the whole thing kind of really undermines itself. One of the things that often comes out of these discussions is trade union reps saying, look, often, by the time somebody comes to you with a problem, it's too late. There are many scenarios which you're going to really struggle to solve for people. It doesn't mean you can't do anything, but you might not be able to really resolve the whole thing. Often, what people are asking you is not to suddenly rush into coming up with a poster, slick campaign. People are asking you just to listen to them and to acknowledge what they've just said.
Yeah, there's this pressure that something needs to be done, and there needs to be an immediate show of strength, if you like, or of what we can do, and it doesn't work like that. If you're going to organise a workplace, get people into the union, have an effective union, then it's about listening and bringing people along and helping workers achieve things themselves as much as anything else. And this week I was at a meeting where we were talking about the trade union bill and how we would respond to it and the check-off attack. And I was in a minority over a slogan which was about unison, worth fighting for. I thought it was completely wrong. The attack on check-off being an attack on unison. Well, it's not an attack on unison, it's an attack on working people's unionism. And to me, it should have been about workplace unionism, worth fighting for. That's what we're fighting for. It's almost like we're fighting for this institution. Thanks very much. That's
right. And it completely misses the point, and it plays on people's guilt, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because the number of times we've been to left-wing meetings and suddenly you're like, oh no, I feel really shabby because I'm not putting my job on the line for the revolution. And you're just like, no, hang on, what's in it for me? It has to be very clear what we get out of this, I think, at all points.
Absolutely.
Otherwise you're just blackmailing people.
People have a difficulty with this in trade unions. People join unions for self-interest.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why would you join? The recognition that actually, if I have a disciplinary, if somebody makes a malicious complaint about me in terms of the treatment I've provided, who's going to help me? Who knows the rules? Who knows the what normally happens? And employers don't normally let lawyers into the internal proceedings. If they did, in any case, it costs you an arm and a leg. And for relatively modest sums, you get the support of what should be good representatives with access to legal support, and if you end up in a professional body, we support you there too,
So it's possible that people will join unions also for other things like being able to discuss collective issues, so the kind of softer stuff. I'm not saying trade unions are the only show in town when it comes to negotiating wages, and we've got to keep that going where that's possible. But in a lot of workplaces, there won't be so much room to negotiate. I'm thinking about social care workers, for example. So what are the key things that you're seeing health and social care workers needing, wanting, coming to unions for?
Well, I think it's the same issues which they always have, I think. I do believe that austerity has created a climate where there's a problem around, particularly people who do have professional registration, do have duties under their code of conduct.
Right.
How they reconcile that with significant cuts in service and standards, given that there is within those codes a requirement for people to speak up for the services, isn't it?
That's right.
How do you? I say reconcile that.
So this
and
is
I think
important.
That's where we have a role to play.
So this is around the duty of care and the duty of candour.
Yeah. And I think trade unions, general trade unions, and dare I say professional trade unions, have not been very good at linking those issues into the sort of industrial area of the contracted employment and collective bargaining and that sort of thing. And we can do it when we're representing people on an individual basis, but we're not good at doing it on a broader basis, and I think that's something we need to look at. And I think there's an issue there for us to how unions themselves organise, and the fact that work is often associated with other workers who are doing the same job as them, whether it's professional or not. And sometimes we need to recognise that not everybody sees themselves as one of the international proletariat,
Well, we're saying that in the Tavistock Clinic. A friend and I once probably foolishly tried to set up a trades union for honorary psychotherapists. We didn't manage to recruit anyone. Politics were really difficult. That's not putting anyone down, but the sort of how you organise as well, rightly. You've got to understand the class consciousness or not of the people that you're organising. You can't ask people to choose side in class war anymore.
Well, the way I see it is when you look at surveys of workers as to why they join unions, the top reason, and it's been the same for years and years, is protection at work.
Yeah.
So people are thinking about themselves as individuals.
Yeah.
So we have a challenge to take trade unionism and the collective nature of it to people who in society tend to think themselves as individuals. Not everyone's working down a pit or down a shipyard anymore, are they? So, or the docks, or steelworks. People are often working in smaller or remote type arrangements, which don't necessarily generate a collective culture. And we've got to think about how we do that. And of course, the consciousness issue is once we get the trade union consciousness, you never know what might happen.
Oh no, I'm going to push you on that. So, this is very important. It's another parallel between psychoanalysis and trade unionism, which says doesn't matter, frankly, whichever way you cut it, you can't do it alone. You have to collectivise. So psychoanalysis is a relational model of development. It says if you want to get on with life, you've got to be able to form relationships with people. Yeah. So it's a kind of like relational model of solidarity. So I'm going to ask you this question about how somebody working in health and social care can actually collectivise, because we can think about it for workplaces where there exists a trades union and where there isn't a trades union for whatever reason. Because trades unions aren't ideal as well. Often they can be a little bit off-putting. Some of them have quite old ways of working. Some of them have great reps. It's a real diverse kind of movement. It's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag. So just your advice to somebody who wants to form better relationships with people they work with, how could they approach it?
Well, if they were looking to improve relations through a trade union agency as a way to do it, then I think they would need to approach the trade union and say, look, this is the way it is in our workplace. Can you help us make it better? And the role of the union representative then would be to help facilitate that approach, tackling discrimination and things of this nature. And I think that's really important. Most people recognise those things as important, and if we can help in terms of tackling things which are wrong and putting things right, and showing how people can organise, not necessarily to confront, but just to make things better in work, then we can do that. But it goes back to needing a representative and somebody who's respected by the workforce. And a survey of Unison not too long ago, I think, identified that we had about 1 in 4 workplaces where we had representatives, which means there's a real problem around that. And I think that partly is to do with the fact that we are structured around national bargaining in the public sector, so everything is focused upwards. And as things become more diverse and decentralised, it's a big challenge, but we have to deal with that challenge to be more responsive to people at a local level.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's very interesting that the issues about finding the principles and the social justice issues that underlie the sort of particular problems that you're having at work is really important, because it's generally the point at which people feel that something needs to be done, that they can't do it on their own, and are prepared to act on it. We've got very kind of different political views, but most people, particularly working in health and social care, because there is still an ethos about what it means to care for other people, have a very powerful sense of what happens when things are not fair. It's very damaging.
Yeah.
And we know it. We know it on a gut level. We might know it on an intellectual or political level. So my experience is that these are very mobilising issues for people about what's fair, what counts as care, the importance of having a framework where people can be compassionate in work.
Yeah, there was Alan Flanders who termed the phrase the sword of justice. Trade unions can appear as either a vested interest or as the sword of justice. I prefer the sword of justice. I think you're spot on. I think for me the role of the union is the sword of justice, and so whenever we do things, it's with that in mind. It's about fairness at work. And that's a great motivator.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is just to persevere and not be put off when somebody doesn't welcome you with big arms and say, come and join the union, to be insistent that the structures that may or may not exist in your workplace take note. Often, experiences, you've got to phone up a union several times to say, bring someone here now, there's a group of us that need to talk to you. You might need to make that phone call twice, but it's maybe worth it.
It is. The problem with trade unions, as I see it, and it'll always be there, is...
I'm just going to premise this. You're writing a PhD on trade unions, so you're allowed to say the sentence, the trouble with trade unions is... Normally, I would take issue with that. But...
Well, the trouble is that we are... and I always find it interesting that David Cameron promoted the big society. Well, trade unions are the big society. We rely on volunteers in the main.
Yes.
And because of that, we're also democratic organisations, which are, in theory or in practice, in best part of the time, run by the members. And that's it's imperfect. It creates imperfect structures and sometimes individuals within those structures. And so we're not always as businesslike as we could be. But absolutely persevere, and you will get somebody to help you, because that's what we're there for. That's what we should be doing. And if there's somebody at local level who is not up to scratch, then the democracy should sort that out.
Now, I'm going to ask a final question, which is, I'm just going to say my experience, which you may or may not agree with. One of the problems with union membership going down and union finances going down is that sometimes our unions become really much more defensive. If you're in a hostile environment, you can become defensive. And that often means that the organisations themselves can get pretty grungy and not learn stuff and not be as flexible and as dynamic as we'd like them. In many cases, in my experience of trade unions, maybe being defensive and being a dinosaur is the best that you could do under a complete onslaught. So again, I'm not saying that's a terrible strategy. It might be your only one. But it does mean that there are a lot of frustrated union reps out there who can't do everything that they would like to do. You could say the same with psychotherapists. We're working within imperfect systems. So my final question is, given that nobody ever comes to a trade union rep with great news and offers of money, what keeps you going doing this job?
What keeps me going is, I think being a trade union official is probably one of the best jobs going. The job satisfaction you get from supporting people is brilliant. And in the past week, somebody sent me an email to tell me they love me.
Hey, that's
to
not
which
bad.
I responded, well, steady on a bit.
Stick around.
Yeah. But that's maybe because that's an extreme. But I think it's. I get great. It's brilliant when you help people. People who are being oppressed in one way or another, and you remove that oppression. And I also meet some great people. There are great people in trade unions, particularly at the local level, who, the volunteers and who have a commitment to the cause of collective solidarity. These are people I like to be around, and so as I'm getting closer to retirement, I think these sorts of things I've got to come to deal with missing, because it's been a real privilege to be a trade union official.
Oh mate, I'm going to tell you a little story about yesterday, which is about why I carry on doing this sort of weird job of working in employment relations and mental health. But yesterday I had a really bad day, and all of the institutions that I work with did something really dumb and annoying and frustrating, which was causing me a lot of pain. And all of my good stuff I felt really embarrassed that they didn't value me more, and I was really on a rage. And I was out with some friends last night, and I went to the toilet to check my emails because I had an email spat with somebody that I work with. I was just like, what are you doing? This is not at all what you preach. You're in a toilet checking your work emails at 10 o'clock at night. What were you thinking? That's a really bad idea. And what I got in my email box was a poem from a psychotherapist who just retired. And I'd just written this article called "Do you have to be married to a rich man to be a psychotherapist in the UK?" ? Slightly provocative. And I'd had loads of flack. It'd been published in loads of places. I'd had loads of flack from people. And this guy, just retiring, he just said, "I really like what you do. I've never met him before." He said, "I really appreciate the fact that you put yourself on the line. Here's a poem I did write for you." Oh. And I was just like, it's a real honour. It's a real honour, because this guy's a phenomenal person. He's run an art psychotherapy centre for 25 years with no money. He's helped thousands of people. And you're just like, thank you, human being. From one human being to another, thank you very much.
Yeah. Nice.
Gerry, from one human being to another, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth.